Moon President is what President Moon Jae-in calls himself. It reflects the spirit of the candlelight rallies that led to the impeachment of the former president and the election of President Moon. But it also highlights his commitment to being more open and communicative with the public. True to his word, President Moon has been proactively engaging and interacting with the people whenever possible. But this unorthodox approach is drawing mixed reactions. And that's the topic we're exploring on this week's Upfront.
President Moon Jae-in's efforts to step up communication is being met with mixed reactions. Last month, he addressed the nation on the accomplishments of the People's Transition Committee in the format of a talk show. The president and the first lady, as well as the president's top aides and cabinet members, participated to answer citizens' questions about the government's new policies and reforms. While some applauded the event for being unprecedented and unconventional, others argued it failed to address imminent issues such as national security and the food scare, calling the event a publicity stunt. Among them are his pledge to give regular status to temporary workers in the public sector, a 16.4% increase in the minimum wage, the so-called Moon Jae-in Care focusing on increasing national health insurance coverage, and the ban on work-related texts after office hours. Opinion is sharply divided over Moon's policies, with supporters claiming they're truly people-centered, while critics brand them far-fetched ideas without consideration of funding sources.
일단 인기를 얻고 보자 하는 그런 정책이기 때문에 신뢰를 할 수 없고 믿을 수 없는 그런 정책을 하고 있다고 생각합니다.
맨날 뭐 신문에 나는 거 보니까 무슨 파티장도 아니고 너무 좀 시끄럽다고. 그러니까 포퓰리즘으로 봐야지.
포퓰리즘을 하고 있어요. 시호 정치를 하고 있고 너무 의도적으로 정치를 시호를 하고 있습니다.
이 정도의 소통이 정상인에도 불구하고 우리가 그걸 연출로 생각을 하고 있는 게 아닌가.
정부가 국민이랑 소통을 하려고 노력하는 것 자체가 어쨌든 소통의 일부분이라고 생각해가지고 저는 소통이라고 생각을 합니다.
국민들한테 어떤 걸 하고 있는지 알려주고 있고, 그래서 국민들의 알 권리를 충족시켜주고 있다고 생각을 해서 저는 소통이라고 생각해요.
Are they examples of communicative leadership or unrealistic populism? On this week's Upfront, we hear different perspectives on the president's governing style and policies.
For today's discussion, we are joined by two experts. Bong Young-sik, a research fellow at the Yonsei University Institute for North Korean Studies, and Lee Jun-seok, member of the Supreme Council of the opposition Bareun Party. Welcome. So President Moon has been very actively reaching out to the public. Just in the last few weeks, we had that Liberation Day speech and the unscripted press conference to mark his first 100 days in office, plus the talk show style town hall meeting at Cheongwade. That Cheongwade event in particular, reactions to that have been rather divided. What are your thoughts on President Moon's approach to engaging the public so far?
There's nothing that critics of the Moon Jae-in government to be surprised by this very active behavior by the Moon Jae-in government for the first 120 days, because I review his election campaign platforms, and everything was already clearly stated there that he's going to do very active reach out among the constituents and build consensus and work on effective communication with the common people and opposition parties and the media. And basically, he wants to build his administration focus on the well-being and security of common people in South Korea and enhance the government's responsibility and the support for enhance the basic welfare of the working mothers and the protection of children. So basically, he had set his script out and just carefully and follow the script. Well,
speaking of campaign platforms, how much trust do you put in campaign platforms and pledges, though?
Well, the image is that President Moon Jae-in, not candidate Moon Jae-in, but President Moon Jae-in is actually following what he had pledged as a candidate during the campaign. during which he could have said anything that would have helped him to get more votes. I would say that must be received by the common Korean people in a very positive light, right? Who would not like the president who keeps promises? And if we recall that the most positive element about the Park Geun-hye presidency or the entire political career of the previous president Park Geun-hye was that she represented honest politician who keeps her promises. So I think that it is conservative politicians and parties that have made things very easy for President Moon Jae-in. What the conservative parties have made as big mistakes can be easily avoided by Moon Jae-in government, and that accounts for the very high approval rating that the current government is enjoying. Think about it. He has gathered about 41% of the entire votes in the presidential election, and the support has been doubled for the first 120 days.
Yep.
There is no other parties that enjoy such a hike of popularity since the end of the presidential election.
Well, I partially agree that he's getting 80% public approval rating at the moment, so he's doing well in general, I'll say. But if you look into the details, say, for example, for the THAAD missile defense system related issues, I mean, during the campaign, his impression on the THAAD missile defense system was that he's going to maintain such a strategic ambiguity for our nation's sake. But when he got into his office, he after things changed a bit with the missile launches from North Koreans, all those stuff, he abruptly changes his policies to temporarily deploy the THAAD missile system. But that was foreseen, I would say, quite a long time ago. But he would not accept it during the campaign because he knew that his supporters doesn't like such deployment of THAAD missiles. So I would say a politician should try to abide by their campaign platforms, but at some times he has to make changes, but not this kind of abrupt changes. But he would have to prepare in advance and try to plan before the changes he tries to make. But I think President Moon Jae-in kind of lacks those kind of skills at this moment.
Well, this president is quite different from his predecessors in many aspects. For example, his down-to-earth demeanors, his compassion for the socially marginalized, and direct communication with the public. Critics are saying that these are all part of a publicity stunt to gain support without actually spending any money. Others, however, say that in politics, sometimes it's necessary to appeal to human emotions and sentiments. What do you think?
Well, I think there's nothing wrong for President Moon Jae-in to appeal to people's sentiments. What do you expect from politics? Sometimes you focus on getting material benefits from the government policies, but in many other times you want compassion and support that the state really cares about you. That is why the previous Kim Dae-jung government was heavily criticized when the government seems to lack the genuine compassion and support for soldiers who lost their lives in their conflict with the North Korean Navy. So the Kim Dae-jung government seems to be really indifferent about the loss of precious individual life, as opposed to maintaining momentum to improve inter-Korean dialogue.
Sunshine policy, right?
Right, sunshine policy. So that kind of image that state does not really care the individual citizens' well-being was another reason why the previous administration, the Lee Myung-bak administration, especially during the beef import demonstration, and President Park Geun-hye, which was epitomized by the unfortunate impeachment of herself as the president for the first time in history of Korean politics.
Right.
So Moon Jae-in tries to avoid making the same mistake. And by the way, it was President Lee Myung-bak who emphasized that the value of good communication with common people in the aftermath of the beef protest. So basically, the conservative predecessors of the President Moon Jae-in left him many very valuable and useful pieces of lessons.
I guess what people want to know is whether the things that President Moon is showing us is a genuine act of consideration and care for the people, or whether it's, as they say, a publicity stunt. What do you think?
In the 100 days inauguration event that day,
The Cheongwon-dae event.
in
yeah.
There was
Cheongwon-dae.
the 20th of August. Right?
Yeah, 20th of August event. I remember many people thought that it was a communication with the public in an unscripted manner, but well, the media revealed that there were scripts in there. Say, if you remember that elementary school boy who asked the culture minister Do Jong-han, please do not try to destroy all the artifacts when in construction sites. I can't believe that an elementary school children came up with that idea, but I cannot imagine how any culture minister would answer to that kid saying that, oh yeah, I'm going to destroy them. So it was totally planned in the first place. And second, it was a useless question to some extent. So I think that kind of communication is, I think, what we would call a publicity stunt to some extent.
So part of it doesn't come across as being genuine, right?
But at the same time, so President Moon Jae-in, he knows the media well because well, we are thinking that he's getting advices from all those, TV producers and his members of his campaign to some extent. But he's very good at, I think, I would say, using the media. So, it's a good thing to some extent, but at the same time, policies, you get responses as numbers at the end. So I think we have, say, like 6 months to a year of honeymoon period where he can do all those showing and get 80% popular support. But to some extent, I would say after a year or so, if the numbers don't show up really well, I think people are going to look back in the past and say, what did he do for the past year? They would remember how he was in these TV shows and has had this events and all those stuff. And it might be something that comes towards them at the end. I think.
Now, during that Cheongwon-dae town hall event, President Moon made an interesting statement that the people are no longer satisfied with indirect democracy and that they're now demanding direct democracy. Some see the statement as denouncing the current democratic practices. Others go so far as to say that it's sheer showmanship with no consideration for institutional politics. What is your take on his statement?
We've seen this in several administrations. Say, President Lee Myung-bak. He was definitely not interested in talking with politicians. He would invite all those professors and, say, professionals into his cabinet, and he would condemn the Yeouido politics as a old-time politics. And we remember President Bareun, who at the beginning really seemed to be a politician, but at the end she turned out to be, conferencing with no one else but her few close members. And I think President Moon Jae-in, 4 years ago in his 2012 campaign, he always mentioned that when he gets into office, he's going to value Yeouido politics as a great partner. But things changed after they inaugurate. Say, sometimes presidents would denounce those Yeouido politics as ineffective. Sometimes they would call them not really understanding the public's needs or those kind of views they have on Yeouido politics. But we have a system, and it's a system that a president has to abide by, I think. So, I'm pretty sure that when President Moon Jae-in mentioned the future of politics as a more direct democracy, there is definitely something we have to consider in that comment. But the thing is that I don't want him to be in a manner that his predecessors had experienced, as I mentioned.
Well, if that's a revelation of what's truly in his mind, I agree with Mr. Lee that that's a very dangerous idea. the Yeouido politics or the congressional politics is not supposed to be really efficient. I mean, the efficiency is the hallmark for companies and bureaucracy, but the legislative body of the government is supposed to aggregate very diverse, cantankerous, and contradictory opinions and preferences in the general society. So that is why it is called National Assembly. So the assembling function and collecting and molding a general consensus, representing the general will of people, is a major and vital function of the legislative body of the whole government. But it seems like for the two previous governments, that function or the value of the Congress has been largely ignored and dismissed in the name of the national consensus, harmony, and efficiency. But politics is far more than efficiency. Sidestepping the National Assembly has a potential to be one of the major mistakes that Moon Jae-in government may repeat. I hope that the Moon Jae-in government would not follow the wrong footsteps taken by its predecessors. And the good reason, one good example is that the presidential candidate from Bareun Party, your party, Mr. Yoo Seung-min, was a major victim of this wrong culture during the Park Geun-hye administration, when he wanted to restore the very principle system of the democratically elected government, the separation of powers. He was scapegoated, right? And President Park Geun-hye even singled out him as a representative of the, what is called, the politics of betrayal. But the South Korean constituents sympathized with, thankfully, Mr. Yoo Seung-min and supported him standing on the ground on behalf of the basic principle of separation of powers. He came back gloriously to National Assembly. So I have a full trust in the wisdom of the Korean public, but at the same time, it is the Blue House that may fall into the same trap of temptation in the name of very expedient policy making.
But let's talk about the Moon administration's policies, which have given rise to similar concerns as his communicative efforts. Policies like changing temporary worker status to permanent positions, creating new jobs in the public sector, raising the minimum wage, and most recently, expanding the coverage of national health insurance in what has come to be known as Moon Jae-in Care. Critics say these are all driven by populism.
I would criticize those critics by saying that those ambitious plans had been originally proposed and pushed by the Park Geun-hye administration in the first 2 years of the Park Geun-hye administration. So if they're going to criticize those plans as detached from the reality or too burdensome for national budget, then they had to first confess their mea culpa, right? They was wrong-headed.
Yeah.
And two, they have to come up with better alternatives. But critics has to more than just criticizing the ambitious part of all those proposals, because those proposals were almost exactly those proposals made by previous conservative administrations.
So you see the criticisms as an attempt to hold back.
Where were they? Where were they when those proposals were proposed by their own parties?
Okay.
At the same time, I will say that is the reason we did not see that much critics actively looking into his campaign platform at the time of election, because the election period was relatively shorter than before, say about a 3-month period for the entire election. So there were just not enough time for it. And the other part was that it was a landslide victory for Moon Jae-in. So people didn't really look into what he had to say, but they actually had this saying that anything but what Park Geun-hye has done, that kind of theory. So he has a high public approval rating, and he is sticking to what he had written down in his platform. So there's nothing much to criticize. But at the same time, I mean, things change, I think. I mean, when they, for example, say he pledged to increase minimum wages to 10,000 won in 5 years of his administration.
Tenure, right?
And to be honest, our party, Bareun Party, has pledged the same thing. But I mean, there are ways to alleviate the symptoms that can be caused by the minimum wage increase. Say, I mean, people who run small restaurants and small shops, they're really intimidated by this 10,000 won minimum wage pledge, and they are expecting some more measures to alleviate their shock in this 5 years of period. But Moon Jae-in government is really not looking into that kind of alleviating measures at the moment. So that's the part where the opposition party has some role in it.
Well, the regular session of the National Assembly kicks off today, September 1st. That means legislative battles over President Moon's proposed policies will start as well. So it looks like this reformist versus populist debate is going to continue, at least for the time being. What word of advice would you give to the government as it moves forward with its proposed policies?
Well, I would give the same piece of advice to both the government and the opposition parties in reviewing the national budget for the first time for the Moon Jae-in government. And Honorable Mr. Lee made a very important point in the previous remark that we need time. We need time to see whether this popularity would just remain a temporary bubble, or popularity will work as an ingredient for making these ambitious policies a reasonable success in near future. But we have to spend at least 1 year to have objective and full evaluation of the Moon Jae-in government's ambitious policy proposals, because we are in the proposal stage, and the national budget for this year 2018 is only based upon very hypothetical calculations and the estimations. But at the same time, there must be a reason why President Moon Jae-in has doubled his approval rating since the presidential election, which is almost unprecedented. And there is a reason for the general public to condone the very significant hike of national budget, probably for the first time since 2009, when the Lee Myung-bak government hiked the national budget as a preemptive measures to absorb the shock of the international financial crisis stemming from the mortgage crisis in the United States. So rather than just criticizing some problematic aspects of all these welfare and the reform policies proposed by the Moon Jae-in government, the opposition parties have to, prepare to provide some viable alternatives in the long run. Because after 1 year, there will be more thorough and objective estimate of the first year of the Moon Jae-in government with all these ambitious policies. Then the opposition parties need to be prepared not only to criticize, see, I told you so, but also these are our alternatives.
I would say oppositions, we're not trying to refute their ideas or political agendas in a manner of trying to change the direction, but we're trying to fight with the numbers here. Say in July, I think, there was a dispute about how, so the government named it job-creating budget. That's a really bad thing to do, naming something with a very a good meaning, I think. Say, if you remember Bareun administration, back then, she had same manner in dealing with legislative members, saying, oh, this is our new great job-making budget and job-making bill that we have here. Why are the parliamentary members not accepting this? Are you guys evil to some extent? So that kind of manner really stops all political negotiations and make things worse. So, I mean, when Moon Jae-in government is trying to implement a new policy, budget has to go with it. So please try to talk with the oppositions about the reality and the numbers,
Yeah.
and not trying to make the opposition be viewed as evil or something like that.
So you want more concrete numbers and data,
Definitely.
evidence. Well, it is true. We won't know how good a policy is until it's been tried and tested. But as our two experts point out today, to avoid the trap of populism, the government should be able to produce at least a solid blueprint for the policies that it proposes. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Lee and Dr. Bong, for sharing your insights with us today. That's all for this week. Upfront, we'll be back next week. Thanks for watching.